2026, and we're kicking off XOG on the road. We're going to be traveling, guys, traveling. And to do it up on opening weekend, I have decided to do a dumb thing. I will be in Washington on the 13th at Rowdy Audi, Boston on the 14th for the Boston Legacy debut against Gotham, and at BMO for Angel City's game against the Chicago Stars on Sunday. Yikes.
If you are in any of those markets, be sure to come say hi before the game to Eric. And we plan to try and hit all 16 markets this year. I will be in New Jersey for Gotham FC against the Orlando Pride on Sunday, March 29th. And watch this space for more dates to come. In the meantime, if you are a fan of the show, we are doing a big Patreon sale where you can get an annual membership for a big discount, so be sure to use the code in the show notes for that. And we have launched a store. We have an official XOG store where you can get all the best merch for the start of the NWSL season, and Patreon members get 20% off with an exclusive discount code for that. So those are all the fun little goodies from us. Stay tuned for the show.
Welcome to Expected Own Goals, Feeling Myself edition. I am your host, Eric Morgan.
And I am Evan Davis. Welcome to day 2 of NWSL Preview Week. Today, we are digging into Bay FC, a team that has had a great deal of action this offseason, both on the field and off it. And no better a friend than Anna Daccache of Everything Bagels to take us through the Claire Hutton transfer, new players like Onyeka Gamero, and recently announced Aldana Cometi, and how they are going to transform new head coach Emma Coates' plans for the team in 2026. So, without further ado, please enjoy our discussion with Anna Daccache. Bay FC. Depressing to watch. Maybe not as bad as they seemed. And I have done a whole raft of turnover, both in front of and behind the camera, as it were. And there's only one person who can help sort all of it out. One of the OG XOG FOPs. This is my new thing, the Expected Own Goals Friends of the Pod. She's the co-host of Everything Bagels, the best podcast about Bay FC. Please welcome back to the show, the one and only Anna Daccache. Hello, Anna.
Hello, Evan. Hello, Eric.
Hi. I'm going to start you off. I'm going to start you off with a real softball. Tell me the story of Bay FC 2025.
The story of Bay FC 2025 was cock tease turned funeral. I think
this is why we love you. Cock tease turned funeral.
Yeah, I think when we think about Bay's first season, they started off really poorly and then, made some strides and were able to qualify for a playoff spot. Bay starts the following season relatively decently. I know there were still some questions, but they were winning. They won more games in like a shorter period of time than they had the previous season. They were pulling off draws instead of just picking up losses. And we hit June. Bay is, I believe, sitting at a 4-3-4 record, and then they proceed to never win another game.
Mm-hmm.
June 7th, 2025 is the last time Bay FC won a professional NWSL game.
Wow.
It feels so good.
That's crazy.
And it just wasn't just losses. It was devastatingly bad losses.
Oh, yeah.
In ways that I don't even think I could have imagined had I tried. And I would say that both myself and Zach, my co-host, were probably some of the more forgiving when it came to the Montoya of it all, but very quickly changed our tune. Very quickly. And it was not just a Montoya thing, right? I think there was a roster construction question, so many questions. Mm-hmm. And now it feels like we're kind of looking at just a brand new team for all intents and purposes. So yeah, the story of Bay 2025 was I was naive and got excited, and then they sucked.
Listen, you're not the only one. We all get seduced by whatever pixie dust is being smoked in San Jose. But you are right. There is a massive overhaul of the roster this offseason between, just announced today when we're recording this, Argentine center back Aldana Comedi coming over from Fleury. Anouk Denton, young, exciting fullback, potentially going to be taking the place of Caprice Didasco, who's on family leave for the year. Onyeka Gamero, who was with Barcelona B before tearing an ACL and has a chance of soaking up some serious minutes in the forward line. Kira Berry, promising Manchester United prospect who is now officially over here. Alex Pfeiffer, poached from Kansas City Current. Cristiana Girelli, the Italian legend from Juventus, here for a funny sounding 5-6 month loan. But this all doesn't really matter because the highlight, the banner signing, the only thing that matters is the arrival of Claire Hutton, the 20-year-old future of the U.S. women's national team midfield, who cost $1.1 million to get, but cost no more and no less. Yeah, this is a real radical shakeup. And it's not just on the field, right? Kay Cossington comes over from England to take over the front office, or at least some elements of the front office, and leads the head coaching search because, according to Albertine Montoya, he always wanted to leave, but feels a bit coincidental based on how his first couple of years went and from a lot of the things that are said about how he ran his locker room, even though he was quote unquote cleared of all charges of harassment and emotional abuse.
Oh, jeez.
So before we dig into all of the roster changes, give us the 30,000 foot view of what's going on in the front office, both with moving on from Montoya, bringing in Emma Coates, who, wink, wink, is an old buddy of Kay Cossington's from when working in the England setup. And also, who the hell is running the front office? Matt Potter is still ostensibly the sporting director, but Cossington has been very much on Front Street with a lot of decisions being made this winter.
On 6th Street, you could say.
Yeah.
Who's on 6th? Who's on 1st? What's on 2nd? I think, if we zoom out and think about what's happening with Bay, I mean, they have a new CEO, their business side, sporting side, really a lot of changes. I've heard some people say, is that not concerning for the third year of a club? Maybe, but also, unless Bay just came out the gate winning everything, I was anticipating a lot of turnover. I think even if Albertine had succeeded to a certain extent last year, I don't really know what else. There was nothing else. I don't think he could have done much else with the team. For me, I think from things I've heard, Matt Potter likes what he is responsible for within the front office, but he doesn't necessarily want to be the boss of everything. And so I think the Kay Cossington hire and just how she has taken over more of a role makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think necessarily Matt wants to have to be making every single sporting decision. I think he likes owning the things, particularly in his domain, on the technical side, and then kind of leaving the rest up to Kay and some of the other folks. I think also it is pretty unique to have someone sometimes you have people that are more from the business side in a position like Kay's. Kay Cossington comes from the footballing side. So I think kind of regardless of what people think about her tenure, her experience is in women's soccer, a high level, and also she has overseen the overhaul of the English women's national team setup, and they have been very, very successful in that time. I admit begrudgingly because I do fundamentally dislike the English team. I think there are fair questions to ask about the coaching hires. Albertine didn't really have much pro experience. He was coming from a very youth setup and not in the same. I think, even Coates's youth experience is more professional than Albertine's youth experience because it was at a national team level. That being said, what I've heard about the goals of the club starting this year are this year is a foundation building year. That is not to say the team doesn't want to win or doesn't think they can win, but rather I think there's a understanding from the top down in both the locker room and the front office of they did not do a good job of actually building a foundation the first go around. And they now have a team full of many young players, many who are either really great prospects or someone like Claire Hutton, who has kind of, is already being put in discussions for like national team captain in a couple of years at 20 years old, which is really, really impressive. And obviously her work on the field speaks for itself. I think Bay is maybe operating in a more realistic mindset than they had in the past. What that says about like the roster as it currently stands, I think that aligns with it, but I still think there's, questions to be had.
To follow up on one thing that you did say with regard to Cossington and Potter's division of labor, is it your understanding that Potter is focusing more on the technical side of things and Cossington's running point on recruitment and overall senior roster development? Is that how it's shaking out?
So Bay within their like sporting office has like a hire. I cannot recall her name. I'm going to be completely honest, but she essentially came in and was like the new Austin. Yeah. So they do have someone in there. They have two people in there that are like responsible for recruiting. But I think Kay is more involved with that than maybe someone in her position typically is. And maybe that was just at this point in time. Obviously, we can see, Kay's hands all over the hiring of Emma Coates and Gemma Davies. But then you can also see the influence of them in the roster, some of these roster signings, particularly with, I think, Anouk and Kira. And just clearly their like desire to sign younger players who they have like a lot of experience working with at the like U23 group, and it's also U19s. So I would say like the whole thing's pretty collaborative, but I do think when it comes to Matt's responsibilities, and this is just like my interpretation from what I do know, he likes existing in the like technical space, and it's not like he's opposed to the recruiting side, but I think he is okay with other people having like their hands in that.
So this is like a Cali Sober reboot of what has come before. That the club, which was so ambitious out of the gate, basically, I think to varying degrees floundered trying to figure out what their identity is. Do you feel like, and Emma Coates is of course the tip of the spear, that there is finally like some version of a stable hand running this club?
I don't know if I can give an answer to that just because we haven't like actually seen anything happen yet. What I will say is, as exciting as a lot of the signings were when Bay was first announced, one of the big question marks was really just like, do these players work together? Do these players work in the NWSL? And for some, the answer was yes, right? Like maybe Rachel Kundananji hasn't been the player people necessarily expected, but she has definitely become a key player for Bay. And I think, for me, like, I think she's done a very, very good job. Someone like a Castellanos or even an Oshuala, Jen Beattie, we always said was like a locker room hire, but I think at that point, it's like maybe that was kind of a waste of a locker room hire. That felt a little crazy. What I do know, and what I have been told, is that Emma, as a coach, is actually very, very willing to listen and learn to the like technical staff and like work with them. And that is not to say that Albertine and his coaching staff were not. I think they were just like, because there were some, I do know, I would say like Angela Salem, people really loved working with her like on the technical side. But like, I think some of the other coaches on the staff were like a lot more traditionalist. I mean, I think even Brandy Chastain's a really good example of this in the way she talks about, she just like, to her, the data of it doesn't make sense and she doesn't really bother to learn about it. And I kind of understand where she's coming from considering when she played, but the game is different now. And so I think Emma being so open to that side of things feels like there's more of a connection there.
So we've got Hutton, we've got Aldana Cometti, and we've got all of these new signings that I listed at the top of the show. But let's focus on the defense right now, which was something that Bay it just straight up collapsed in the second half of 2025. They were one of the worst defensive performers over those 3 or 4 months, which got them down to tied for last place on points and just barely above the basement on goal difference. So Cometti who is no spring chicken, has been around the block. She's going into her age 30 season. Hutton, a decade younger, are both projected to maybe fill some very key spots. And maybe we also fold Didasco's absence and Anouk Denton's presence there, and also sort of the merry-go-round of other center back options, whether it's Brooklyn Courtnall and Sydney Collins, who finished the year there, and also the impending returns of players like Abby Dahlkemper and Emily Menges at some point in the year, and Kelly Hubley sort of like hovering around and waiting in the wings. Like, how do all of these defensive pieces fit together in your mind? Has the club kind of given any indication of what the plan is back there?
So I think the signing of Committee makes a lot of this come together for me. Looking at some of the preseason games and some of those backline lineups that they were putting out, there was always kind of this question of who is the veteran presence on the backline. Because, like, if your veteran presence on the backline is Joelle Anderson, all due respect to Joelle, that's just, like, not the answer.
Yeah.
I am, like, totally fine with Anderson, you know, floating between defense and midfield. I think she has definitely, like, served a purpose in that regard, but she cannot be the, like, vet on our back line, particularly when you have a keeper who's still technically so new as Silkowitz, right? So I think for me, I feel confident saying I would imagine Kometti's gonna, at least Bay's plan is to have her playing and starting. I was looking at her, like, match log, and the past, like, 13, 14 games she's played in, she's played a full 90 for every single one. So to me, like, that is at least a positive side to, like, okay, her fitness levels. But then the rest is, I think, really up for interpretation. We know that Anouk can play both sides, like left back or right back. So I think there's some flexibility there. I think probably coming in for Didasco is where I see her filling that gap. I know one of the back lines that showed out well in preseason was Heather Gilchrist, Anderson, Collins, and Alyssa Mallinson. So, you know, if Heather has looked pretty good with the team, I'll be curious to see how she works into the rotation. I don't think I haven't seen enough of her to be like, yeah, she's going to start. And I don't think Joelle's going to be starting on the back line either. But, you know, you have Sydney Collins, you still have Alyssa. It's really, for me, going to be Cometti and maybe some, like, children on the back line.
Yeah.
Just running through it, and we'll sort of break it down a little bit more position by position. And I want your take on Jordan Silkowitz here, but how many inning starters are there right now? Evans put together a potential 11, but, like, by your read, how many players are sort of like locks to be starters? Because it feels like not a lot.
So if we operate under the assumption that Bay signs another keeper who's not going to be the number one, because I just don't, who are they signing? Jordan Silkowitz is the start, like, is the lock for keeper. There's, like you said, discussions to be had about that, but I think for now, lock. I think backline, Cometti, and then I would say, you know, if you'd asked me last year, I would have said Alyssa, but I don't even think Alyssa's a lock at this point.
She had a really rough
midfield.
Last season,
yeah, midfield, Huff, Hutton, Bibar. For me, the midfield makes way more sense now than it has ever before. The forwards, there's also like a who, but I think Kundananji and Hawking, I think there's a world in which the forward line actually rotates a lot depending on the opponent, but I do think Kundananji and Hawking are going to see many minutes. Girelli signing, I have my own theory about that one.
Please tell us. We don't have to go in order. Tell us the Girelli theory.
It's not juicy. It's Kundananji was supposed to be gone for a month and a half at WAFCON. And WAFCON got canceled like 3 days ago, which is its own disgrace, but we don't have to go into that. So as a Bay fan, I'm obviously like, okay, I'm stoked. Rachel's still here. For me, she just kind of felt like a person to fill that hole because Bay didn't necessarily want to like sign someone long term. I also, again, like with so many of the quote unquote like veteran players on this team on maternity leave or about to go on maternity leave, having just another, because if you look at our front line, it's young. Like before you sign Girelli, Tess Bodie is the most veteran presence on the front line. That's insane. And she's not the most veteran presence in terms of playing. Like, she's obviously not the best player on the front line.
So do you anticipate Girelli soaking up a fair bit of playing time now that Kundananji is going to be around? Because it's an odd thing. I mean, if you wanted to find somebody to sort of plug in short term, signing an almost 36-year-old immobile Italian striker is maybe not the move that I would make personally.
Oh,
but
no, I completely agree.
Yeah.
For me, I always felt like she was going to come off the bench and that one of our other players was just going to see more playing time or more starts.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that during the preseason, Gamero showed out pretty nicely, particularly in the game that folks within Bay told me is like the best they've looked ever. And this was their like Coachella Valley game against Houston. Some folks within Bay were saying, you know, they personally felt like it was the best they'd seen the team as like a cohesive unit. And in that game, Gamero provided the game-winning assist where she, quote, dribbled around and through 3 defenders as she drove toward the end line and then sent a sharp pass to B-Bar at the top of the box, who was able to collect the ball and then one-touch goal. So
sounds good to me.
That sounds great. You know, Gamero's still super
Houston,
young.
But yeah.
Yeah, again, it is against Houston. I think it was like less about the opponent and more about just like the cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, you know, we've seen Bay play well or have good results and look like shit.
Yeah.
And then we've seen them play well and not win. So I think the fact that they won and people thought that they looked good is the big thing here. Yeah, Girelli, I don't know. I think also part of that was like, for me, I know she signed another year with Juve. And for me, it feels like they're able to offload part of her contract while she can like still stay with them and maybe like finish out her career there. So I think it was like a 3-way, like her personal decision, Juve needing to offload part of her contract and Bay being like, okay, we need another player who can like, even from the bench, provide like vibes.
Because it is thin up there. The forward line is not a deep area of the team, which is why Gamero feels like the only legitimate option up front, which is wild to say about a 20-year-old who, until very recently, was playing for Barcelona B before she busted her knee, and also having to come back from that injury. So what do you make of Gamero from what little you may have seen of her or what you've heard around the club about her, and how she could fit in like a Gamero Kundananji Hawking front line?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say just from like I think she fits really well with the club. She like admitted herself she was really excited to be back in California where she's from. So I think she, you know, having a happy player is a very important thing, especially for players at that age. You know, Bay has had young players in the past who really struggled being away from home, and they are both of them no longer with the club. From a like playing perspective, I think I have watched a lot of Barca B in the past, and then I also know that just from like a training perspective, they spend a lot of time with the senior team. So sure, from like a game day perspective, she, you know, wasn't playing in Liga F, but from a training perspective, she has been surrounded by some of the best players on the planet and in one of the best training environments on the planet. You know, we've talked about this, why some players choose to go to like Lyon or Barcelona or some of these clubs where they don't really have any other competition, but like the training environment is so elite. They are still able to stay at the top of their game. So for me, I think bringing that energy here is really valuable. And she's competitive. She really can move well with the ball. I think something actually Bay has been lacking is like someone that's like a really good dribbler. So that's nice. Like I do think like Bay has some great players that can like feed balls in, but not necessarily, maybe apart from Kundananji, who I think sometimes can do the Tobin Heath thing where it's like, okay, you're taking one too many touches, or like, why are you playing a game? Just like shoot the ball.
Or 6 too many touches. Yeah.
So I think having a player like Anyeka who's still so young, you can like maybe train out some of those bad habits will be good. And then also the fact that like she can technically exist as like in this like attacking position, but can also feed the balls to players like B-Bar, who's like able to get up. So seeing that relationship between the forward line and the midfield, I know it's one game, so sample size, oof, but it was, you know, like a lot of these, she's just back from injury and playing in her like first minutes with the club. So
yeah,
I have very high hopes. I'm not putting that on her for like to show out right away though. Not at all.
Before we get to the centerpiece, that midfield and how it works, I just want to ask you, last year, Rachel Kundananji really struggled. I think from a numbers POV, this was a pretty sharp decline. Which version of Rachel Kundananji do you feel is more real? The 2024 sort of explosive luminary Rachel Kundananji, or like 2025's like soul survivor out on the wing and in the middle of the park struggling version? Or is it somewhere in between?
I'm going to push back a little bit. I think maybe she struggled scoring, but I don't think she was like struggling as a whole player. I think her role changed, particularly when Hawking was on the field, and Hawking kind of became this like goal machine in the like first half of the season. Obviously then she got injured. But Rachel was one of our better, if not best, players at like creating chances and providing assists, which again is maybe not the role we thought she would have when she first signed with Bay, particularly looking at how she had to play in Spain. But that was also a very different team, very different setup. So I think there's maybe like a mix, and not necessarily in a like struggle way, but more in just to unlock the best of Kundananji, she needs to be able to do some of the things she did in season 1, but maintain that like knight in shining armor ability that I think she had in season 2, where she wasn't the one like winning the games for us, but without her presence on the field, we would never have defenders drawn in certain directions. We wouldn't have someone there to like get the ball first and then pass it. She, I think, provided a lot that doesn't necessarily always show up in the more obvious numbers, or even in any numbers.
You know, and her XG numbers are pretty much in line with what she did in 2024. Actually, her expected assist numbers dropped off a little bit, but also Albertine Montoya was sticking her at the 9 way too much. And that's not going to help a player with Kundananji's dynamism or any of the natural skill set that she has.
Honestly, where I think she needs to improve is just like, I think where we saw her struggle was the mental part of the game. I think when she wasn't able to make things happen, you could see her get frustrated. And I think this is where sometimes I'm like,
she sees red mist sometimes too, doesn't she?
Yeah. I remember that like she's still pretty young, like relatively young in the grand scheme of like life. So I think that honestly is where I would really like to see her step up. And I think is really important to step up when the rest of your front line is like 12 years old.
Evan, you want to do the midfield?
Yeah, I mean, how good is this midfield going to be, man? Like, it's such an unusual situation to have 3 very young players who all have tremendous potential and have realized that potential to varying degrees. But despite Taylor Huff's maybe struggles, as the data would suggest, I mean, she still has a very big reputation from what she was able to do in college. Same thing with B-Bar and Hutton's Hutton. Like, I don't know of too many midfields who are going to field that ceiling of potential and have all the pieces be under the age of 25. What's that going to look like?
So I think if we rewind to last season, obviously B-Bar came in a little bit later, so she has had less time with the club. So there was like some, tinkering there. I feel like I said this a lot, Zach said this a lot, I'm sure you guys said this a lot, and I think the consensus was kind of like B-Bar and Huff have a lot to offer, but something is very obviously missing in the midfield. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, of course they need another player who can like provide this stability, I was like, they need a vet. That's how I was like interpreting it in my mind. Now, I think Claire Hutton is maybe better than a vet, and I don't necessarily mean like actually as a player, but I think she will be. Admittedly, I cried when the Claire Hutton announcement was made. I was shell-shocked. I had no idea what was happening. Usually I have like some inkling that at least a signing is being announced, if not already knowing who it is. I knew nothing about this, which is funny because I knew about Croy like so far in advance, as you guys know.
Yeah.
So I think Claire gives Hannah and Taylor the room to be the players they need to be, because there is now someone else in the midfield that can like play to their level, realistically play beyond their level.
Mm-hmm.
And Claire also has just like more experience in the league, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Still can't drink legally.
Which for me, great. I don't want any of our players touching a sip of alcohol in season. Thank you very much. They can follow the rules I did in high school when I was a high school athlete, which is dry season. I mean, I think there's still questions because we've actually never seen them play together. They have played one single game together, or maybe two, and it was in that the one that I'm like most familiar with is the Houston game. They also played a preseason game later that was against a like amateur team, so that being a win like says less to me than anything else. I feel confident given I will just say like, okay, yeah, you have Hutton, you have Huff, you have B-Bar. Unfortunately, after that, the midfield, there's a pretty drastic decline. And I say this loving literally all of these players. I adore Dorian Bailey. I think sometimes she comes on the field and like we'll have a single moment of brilliance and then you're like, where has that player ever been? And then they don't show up for like 10 games, which is fine. But again, Dorian Bailey is now the vet on this midfield.
Right.
Which I guess isn't crazy. She has been playing for a long time. For me, the question really lies in like the rotation, not the start. Who comes in if one of them is like down or gassed or just who's coming in? Because none of the rest of these players even have like similar profiles, quite frankly. And Conti being listed as a midfielder is funny to me just because most of the time she will play up top.
It just feels like a very high risk, high reward roster construction at the moment where if the starting 11 can realize their potential and stay healthy, this is potentially like a top 4 side. And if 1, 2, or 3 of them get hurt, or if they're only hitting their 40th or 50th percentile outcomes, then things get dicey really fast. So this is a good segue to Eric's 2 chambered and holstered concluders.
Yeah, I think, to sort of bounce off what Evan just said, it just feels like it's very transitional, this team. Like they've done a good job to acquire on a reasonable timeline a fair number of pieces that put you on the path to being an actually good team. And as is often the case with transitional teams, it's like, well, we still have some other rostered people. God, one year will name my fantasy team the Portrait of Dorian Bailey, but it's not happening this year. And like it's
my God, that's too good.
It's just not happening this year. My question to you, play armchair GM right now for me. You get to add, not necessarily one specific player, though if you'd like to, you're welcome to. One profile of player that you feel like could immediately improve this iteration of Bay FC today. Could make the 2026 season really sing. Add one player, make one signing for me. What kind of player are we talking about?
Okay, it's funny because we actually haven't talked about this position. I'm signing like an established keeper.
Go on. Because we haven't talked about Jordan Silkowitz. Yep.
Yeah, I think when we saw it last season, right? Like I will never put everything on a keeper. You can't. Like it's literally never 100% of the time the keeper's fault. That's just not how the game plays out when you have 10 people in front of you. But when you have a back line that is missing their typical starting center back pair who are also like the vets and often captains of the team, you now have a third person from that back line who is like the next closest thing to like a vet or like is another vet and then would typically also wear the captain's armband out. You need a keeper that can be commanding, and you need a keeper that has been in this position before, and Jordan just quite frankly hasn't been in this position before. And I think we saw that a lot last season where, yes, the back line would sometimes put her in really bad positions, but if you even had a like B tier keeper who has been like really solid in their league career, this doesn't need to be like a national team caliber keeper. I don't think Bay's gonna get a keeper like that literally ever or anytime soon.
But if they could sign Bella Bixby, for example.
Yeah, you have a lot more goals being stopped. Because I think there were a lot of times where it's just like really obvious Silkowitz was out of position. I think sometimes her hands are buttery. And I feel bad. Like, I think she was kind of put in an almost impossible position. She wasn't supposed to be the starting keeper last season. That wasn't going to happen. Our starting keeper retired. So, yeah, for me, I think I could, ask for someone at every position on this team. But I do think I would prioritize either a keeper or like a very, very seasoned center back. And, we signed one. So how she's going to translate in NWSL, I don't know. But we know the Argentinians can get down, so I think she'll be fine.
Yeah, her and Moultrie scuffling.
Yeah, we have young players on the back line now that can, like, run, so, like, she doesn't have to be the one chasing everything down. When it was, like, a Didasco, Menges, Dahlkemper, I was like, okay, Didasco can run, but the other two, what are we doing? They can't run. So, yeah, for me, it's keeper.
It's so funny because you were, like, national team level keeper, and yet Jordan Silkowitz, got call-ins last year.
Yeah. When I mean like playing with the national.
No, exactly. But I also think the funny thing is that like Jordan Silkowitz strikes me as the kind of keeper who's like not great in high volume situations where you're just like, I need to save every single shot in a game. We're going to be facing a barrage of shots, and that was very much the position she was in, particularly in the latter half of last year for Bay.
Who would you guys sign?
Well, I think that for me, the signing that I would go make to answer your question, it's just up top. You just need a striker, and I don't think Girelli is the answer there. And I don't know how much I have faith in, like, Gaimero this year making a jump, but also you wouldn't want to block her.
Yeah, agreed.
Like,
for me, I feel like we could see a striker being signed in the summer window, particularly knowing that, like, Girelli's going to be out the door. I know some people speculate, like, maybe Bay will do, like, a loan-in sign. I don't see that happening, like, quite frankly. They would have just, they would have signed her outright. Juve was totally, I feel confident saying Juve would have been totally fine not re-upping her contract.
Yeah. All right. So next question. You are apparently quite data-friendly, Emma Coates. What's keeping you up at night? What is the nightmare that you are having that denies you the ability to sleep about this upcoming season?
The fact that, like, beyond a potential starting 11, the rest of our roster's kind of shit. And I say this as, like, someone who, like, does truly love these players, and I probably give them more grace than a lot of people do. For me, if I'm Emma Coates, I'm thinking, how do I, and this is quite literally horrible, how do I offload my players that are all having babies?
Wow.
Yeah, that's cold.
And it's not because they're having babies. I would actually be fine keeping Caprice. I am just like, I'm very happy for her. I'm just like, you really had to also get pregnant at the same time. But, like, I do think Dahlkemper and Menges have given all they can give. I'm fine with them coming back for the rest of the season. For me, if I'm Emma, I'm like, okay, we know this season's a building season. I need to be in a position where come fall of 2026, I know that I'm going to have the ability to sign people in their place and have the cap space coming from them. Because, like, like, Dahlkemper is definitely not on, like, a small contract. Yeah, that's for me. I would want to get the money from those kinds of contracts to do, like, another, not even necessarily like a marquee signing, but focus on bringing someone else in.
Yeah, and thankfully, given their timelines, they're probably not really going to be available to, like, September at the earliest. So you have plenty of runway to experiment and figure out, like, what the game plan is back there. Let's bring this sucker home. 13th place on 20 points. Pretty awful on the surface. Underlying data suggests that even despite those bad patches in the second half of the year, overall, they were probably better than that, although maybe not playoff caliber. The American Soccer Analysis projection model pegs them for 11th place in 2026. Anna Daccache, where do you think BSC is finishing in the table come November?
I'll give them 10. I think 10. 9 or 10. I think they'll finish just outside of playoff contention, and I will be fine with that as long as they're competitive in games.
And if you had to choose between 9 or 10?
You know what? I'll say 10 just because our, like, bench doesn't exist. And I think in the NWSL, that's very, very, very important. If we were in another league, fine, different discussion. You have a starting 11 that can win games. You don't need a bench, but here you need a bench.
Yeah, it's 10th for me as well for many of the reasons that you listed. Again, this just feels like a really high ceiling, potentially really low floor side. So if a couple things go sideways, they probably have enough talent to not embarrass themselves the way that they did last year, but it's just not. It's not going to be playoff caliber.
Obviously, I made this pick before the Comedy signing, which I do think actually answers some real questions here. I had them 11th. I think it's really just an evaluation of the talent on hand and the depth available to them in what will be this year a 30-game season, which I think really will test the limits of the team's bench.
Longest women's professional season ever across all three leagues.
That's crazy.
That's wild.
I know, right?
That's wild. Yeah.
We're in uncharted territory.
And like Bay's, what is the upper end? The Bay is like a playoff team, and like maybe not a home game playoff team, but a playoff team. And the downside, of course,
if they're a
is
home game playoff team, my question is, what the hell happened to every other team in the league? Not Bay.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly right. Yeah. I think like their ceiling's more like 6th, but like the floor here, especially if you lost like Hutton and another midfielder, the floor is like very low.
Yeah.
So,
and then you're relying on the disasters that are Utah and Chicago and potentially Boston, like going belly up to keep you out of the basement.
I can be honest, I have no idea what to expect out of Denver. And that's our first game. Like, I quite literally have no idea what to expect from Denver. Except we're playing in Denver and there's no heaps, so that's like one player that I can like remove from the lineup. But other than that, I'm like, this is such a random roster.
And for more insight on that, you can listen to the season preview from XOG on the Denver Summit.
That's why he gets the Bucks. What a transition.
You can listen to Anna during the season at Everything Bagels, wherever you get podcasts, and you can follow her on social media at Gnocchi FC. We love you to death. Thank you so much. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to do all the things you're supposed to do with podcasts. Rate us 5 stars, drop a kind review in your podcatcher of choice, and follow along with the feed if you haven't done so already. Tell all of your friends about us if they don't know about the show up to this point. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X Own Goals on all social platforms. Keep your eyes out on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok for a lot of cool exclusive video content there. And if you believe we've made an own goal, please email us at xog@xowngoals.com. That's the letter XOG at the letter xowngoals.com. Looking forward to our next season preview very soon.